Okay, you guys, I wanted to just take a minute to talk about the surface that we're about to create. The book has an entire chapter written about surfaces. One of the things we're going to do here in this class is we're going to create what's called a tin surface. And TIN stands for Triangulated Irregular Network. It's really just a bunch of triangles that the computer creates between our points. And so in the near future, what we're going to do is we're going to create an existing ground surface. We'll look at the slopes. We'll label some of the slopes, of course. This, like I said, is called a tin surface. You'll hear that term in civil engineering a lot. And then we'll also label our surface, the contours and spot elevations. As far as understanding surface basics goes, this is actually the highlighted portion of my book. It says that the computer generates a triangular plane using a group of 3 points, and each triangular plane shares an edge with another triangular plane, and a continuous surface is made. It goes on to say that the surface has no thickness. Interestingly, you cannot have a vertical face in a surface, so we have to, cheat a little. They say here you can do a slight offset of, a thousandth of a foot or something. And then the last thing is no caves or no tunnels. So that's not something we have to worry about. What the computer is actually doing is we've got points in different places. We've got a point here and a point here and a point here and point here. All these different points that we've collected. And what the computer is going to do is it's going to follow some sort of logic to create lines between each one of these, or between these points, and thereby create little triangles. The way that it creates those triangles is somewhat dictated by the fact that we're defining some break lines, and our break lines are going to control the way that these triangles are made. So you can see here it says break lines prevent triangle lines from being drawn through them, but they allow them to be drawn along them. So, for example, on the north side of the parcel, we have a ditch, and the mistake that we don't want the computer to make is to draw one of those lines from the top of bank on one side of the ditch to the top of bank on the other, because that's not a correct representation of the surface. So again, just one more thing. If we have a surface, and I'm looking at it kind of in cross section right here, this point right here, that would be what I would call my top of bank. And then, so there's my grass. And then down here, we've got what's called toe of slope. Okay. When we think about the ditch, on the north side of the property, ditch usually has a cross section that looks something like this. So what we did was we took shots on the top of bank on both sides, and also center line of ditch in the middle. And the mistake we don't want the computer to make is to assume that the ground is between these 2 points. It has to go from here to here and then back up to properly represent the ditch. Okay, so now we'll get started creating our surface. By the end of the video, we will have a surface and we'll have contours. And then we'll create another video in the near future on labeling those contours, labeling some spot elevations, and labeling some slopes. Thanks. Okay, you guys, today we're going to create our surface. We've got pretty much everything in place right now. We have 6 break lines that we've already created, 3 for the ditch, 2 for the hole, and 1 for toe of slope near the roundabout. We've also got a back of curb line, which is this back of curb line right here, which should be one continuous feature line, is going to serve as the boundary. And then finally, we already created a point group, which we called TOPO, and that point group is going to define the points that are used. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and in our tool space area, let's right click on surface and choose create surface. The only thing I'm going to change right here is the name, and I'm going to call it existing ground. Actually, I want to change this style here where it says contours 2 foot and 10 foot background. I'd like to make that 1 and 5. Contours 1 foot and 5 foot background, and I'll say OK here. And then I'll just say OK here. So now if I look over here in my tool space area, you can see here's my existing ground surface. So now let's expand that. Let's go to the definition area right now. In the definition area, let's right click on break lines and say add. And the very first one we'll call top of bank north of ditch. I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to go in here, and I'm going to select that top of bank line there. Now let's go ahead and right click on break lines again and add this one. I'm going to call center line of ditch. And I'm going to select my center line of ditch feature line. There it is. Now you can see Civil 3D is actually trying to draw the contours already based on the information I've given it. We've got a couple more break lines to define here. This one will be top of bank south of ditch. Right click on break lines, select add. This one is top of bank around manhole. Oh, sorry, I tried. I clicked on boundaries. Add. This one will be toe of slope around manhole. And one more toe of slope northeast of roundabout. Now we're going to add our point group. So I'm going to go down here to point groups, right click on point groups and say add. We already created that topo point group specifically for this purpose. So I'm going to say topo. Now you see it's creating a larger area than we really need. The last thing I need is a boundary. So now I'm going to right click on the boundary and say add. This one I'll call back of curb. And I'm going to zoom way in here where I can see my back of curb line, and I'll select that as my boundary. And so you should see that it trimmed my surface. So now we've got a surface. It's called existing ground. If we take a minute to look at this, we can see that it created the surface correctly. These are contour lines, of course. And one thing you'll notice is there is a darker color. This darker color occurs every fifth contour, and those are called index contours. These are, of course, 1 foot contours. You can see that the hole is correctly represented because we've got some, they appear almost like circles, so that depicts a hole right there. You can also see here that the closeness, or these contours are closer together above the toe of slope than they are below the toe of slope. So that looks correct. And then the last thing, in a ditch, you can see here that the contours have that classic V shape where the V of the contour points in the upstream direction. So all of these have kind of a V shape, which is the way they should look. So our surface is now created, and in the next video we'll look at labeling the contours, labeling some spot elevations, and labeling some slopes. All right, good. Thank you.